How's everyone doing?
Good.
It's, do we have a quorum? We're kind of short numbers, aren't we?
Very short.
Seven.
Exactly.
Do we have a quorum?
You have exactly.
We have exactly a quorum.
Quorum.
Well, let's call this meeting to order at,
Shannon's here. At
Yeah.
8.
we-
Oh,
okay,
yeah,
at
Shannon's.
at 11:02. Do we have any comments from the public this morning? Yes.
Good morning, my name is Bobby Flory, and I'm with the Lawrence Home Builders Association, and we had sent a letter to the members of this board regarding an issue that's come up. It's a development issue, it's related to our comprehensive plan, and there is a window of time really where there's an opportunity for this group to have input on the discussion that's being held. It's at the Planning Commission right now, and I didn't expect to go into that discussion today, but certainly I'd be willing to answer any questions. But I'm here today, and the point of our letter was to request that perhaps it be put on your agenda for May after everyone on the board's had a chance to read it and consider the implications.
Thank you, Bobby. Any other comments? Yes.
Hi, my name's Tammy Nevels, and I'm here, this is new to me, so bear with me. We are in the process of purchasing the old penthouse property, my husband and I, and our original intent for that property was to put a couple of homes on it, flip it, and sell it. As I started looking into affordable housing and became more and more interested in it, I met with Nikki and got a better understanding of what that actually means. And I have a tendency to go from here to over to here. So my big idea now is that I would like to put, and I'm skipping a lot of the details, but I would like to put 2 fourplexes on there. And this would be in conjunction with a program that Nikki has, and she's going to explain that to you here in a minute. But I was just trying to feel you out for if this fits within what you guys think would be a good solution to some of the affordable housing issues. I'll let you explain the program. And
Hi, Nikki Danicki, the Housing Authority. And the program we're talking about is our Continuum of Care Permanent Supportive Housing. We've been operating that, I believe, for 15 years in a house with a private landlord that we pay and manage the property for. That house is becoming, needing some upgrades and updates, and so this would be a great opportunity, especially as we build the cottages, to have all of our supportive housing programs in a newer, environmentally sound building that's really designed to help those with severe and persistent mental illness, the right kind of lighting and the right kind of access for those with disabilities. So that being said, I think this is a great opportunity to explore and learn about the private-public sector cooperations of this city's goals for affordable housing. So our next steps, there's a lot of work to be done to change coding, and we're going to zones, and so we're going to meet tonight the East Lawrence Neighborhood Committee to talk to them about our thoughts.
yeah, just see if we have their support. We actually met with Scott Nicola last week, and he kind of gave us an idea of where to start and how long the process might take and what would help our chances of getting this approved. And I guess if we get illness support, that's a good place to start as well. So that's next on our agenda.
Yeah, we're taking it on a bus tour here, so thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Thank you for the information.
I'm sorry, can I get your name again?
I'm sorry?
Your name again?
Tammy, T-A-M-I, Nevels, N-E-V-E-L-S. Thank you.
Do we have any other comments from the public? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Taliaferro. I'm here with Justice Matters. Yesterday was Sunday. It's nice to start from a point of agreement on a Monday. I happened to be in church yesterday, and we sang this hymn, and one of the lines in it called us to serve the poor and homeless first, our ease and comfort last. I just wanted to use that as a framework for my comments this morning. We have an affordable housing crisis that is not new, but it's worsening. We've, in fact, studied this issue in 1993 and again in 2005. The BBC study concluded last year gives us more timely information, but the gap is only increasing in the intervening years. In the meantime, we have seated at the table housing and service providers who have been building, rehabilitating, and maintaining permanently affordable housing with supportive services. And they have a regional reputation for excellence. But the problem has persisted. There are several factors contributing to this, and for brevity, I'll just list a few. These organizations run primarily on federal funding and local philanthropic dollars. Those federal funds have shrunk 32% since 2012. Local funding is necessary, and we have now made those local commitments. The open housing market has not been able to serve the gap of the roughly 40% of the people living here who are economically challenged and housing cost burden, and is even less likely to be able to do that because of many factors, including the cost of land in Lawrence city limits. I think it's doubled in the last several years. A large percentage of housing that is affordable on the open market is often substandard quality. Again, that's a point of discussion, and is not guaranteed to remain affordable. A number of factors threaten the likelihood that free market affordable housing will remain so. That's something that we need to look at. Income growth is not keeping pace with the cost of living increases, and we as a community simply are unlikely to provide the earning power or income subsidy of close to $17, the equivalent of $17 an hour for 40 hours a week to every single household in Lawrence. Therefore, I think we need a culture shift in Lawrence. We need an understanding that with such a pressing need, roughly 700 households that are experiencing homelessness, 2,500 Lawrence community member households, plus 2,500 student households, so 5,000 households living cost burdened and one crisis away from losing their housing. We must make community benefit the first lens, and often the only lens we look through when decision-making to more effectively and more quickly address the crisis. I bring this up because I think we need to consider making the density bonuses or the density allowances something that is only available to nonprofits whose sole aim is to create permanently affordable housing. Neighborhoods are collections of taxpayers and voters, and we have a pretty clear idea who voted for this tax that we're about to start realizing in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund soon. We talked to over 330,000 of them on the phone. We attended public meetings and talked to people on the streets, talked to our own members, and went door to door. No one we talked to who voted yes for question 3 was hoping to see an economic benefit from using their tax dollars in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And you can expand that. Their primary goal in whatever policy we set or whatever we do was they were hoping to see safe, accessible, affordable housing for everyone. There can be public-private partnerships, but trying to assure that through the density allowance or this density bonus, it maybe can't be that. We ought to only use this as a tool for creating affordable housing. And if that means for the moment that only nonprofits use it, then so be it. At the moment, they know how to provide permanent affordable housing and manage it carefully and regulate that use. So rather than spend a lot of time investing in codes, in city and staff resources in looking at different codes and different ways to regulate that, we might instead focus on bringing a large number of substandard and non-compliant rental units throughout the city into compliance, and also capturing them as affordable, and do so in a way that doesn't displace or evict people in precarious circumstances. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any other comments? Yes, sir. Please
Hi,
identify
I'm Bob
yourself.
Rummel. I'm actually not familiar with the city process, and I'm learning that right now. So I really look forward to hearing about all your other alternatives. I'm kind of against this double density of RS5 lots for many reasons that I don't really want. I didn't bring enough ammo, at least in a documented stuff, but I'm definitely going to be a victim of that. I have tenants to homeowners have bought Well, they basically bought 2 lots of a single-family home next to my house, oriented in such a way that they would like to put 4 units, small, tiny houses, that basically means that I'm going to be on my back porch eating my Cheerios while 4 families watch me. And so I don't want that for a privacy point of view. I'd certainly like, if there's a better way to communicate a list of factors, like, can I email that to somebody here, or is this the only channel by which I can communicate my views?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Ramos, the information you had sent in earlier
Oh, yeah.
is attached on the agenda under quick updates item B.
I wasn't sure if Sandra Day passed that on.
Yes.
Okay, great,
It
great.
is on the agenda for discussion later.
Okay, well, I'd certainly like you guys to discuss a little bit more, because it wasn't covered in the proposal that Rebecca had put, was the parking issue. I mean, I can address all the issues of the RS5 thing. Parking is a big one. Trash receptacles is a big one. I mean, I'm assuming they're for families. They're not for families? How many bedrooms are
There's
there?
600 square foot 1 and 2 bedroom houses. I don't
So-
know how you'd fit a family in there. These are probably for single people, 1 person
Probably.
per
So-
house.
So,
1 or 2 people. I mean, a
So
2-bedroom could
if it's-
have 1
if it's
person
2
and
people.
a single parent with 1 child.
right.
Could be 2 people.
Well, I live next to that 14 unit complex that you have across the street from me on Prairie and 15. And parking is the nightmare.
Folks, this is an opportunity for public comment. This is not a discussion item at this time on the agenda, so.
So that means we don't talk, but I
Well,
talk?
so
or-
I'm not wanting to create a dialogue between yourself
I see.
and board members at this time. We might have an opportunity to do that later in our meeting,
Okay.
but
Well,
not at this time.
Please consider the parking ramifications of basically 2 families or 2-bedroom people.
Okay.
And basically 2 cars per lot. And all the other things, no shed, pets. All right, that's it for now.
All right, thank you
Oh,
very much.
and land value, et cetera, et cetera.
Mr. Chairman, can I
Yes.
clarify a statement I made? I'm typically used to speaking on behalf of just the Lawrence Home Builders Association, and I'm not sure if I also included, the letter was from the Lawrence Board of Realtors as well, so I wanted to mention that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Are there any other comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll go to item 2 on our agenda. Chair would entertain a motion in regards to the March minutes. And second, Patrick?
No, not a
Oh,
second.
I'm sorry,
Just
excuse me.
Point of discussion.
Yes,
I
sir.
need to make sure that I abstained from approving last month's minutes because I was not here. I didn't have a chance to abstain, so
Very good.
make that change, please.
And as I also was not here, so I can't approve the minutes.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve minutes.
So moved.
And second, any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Thank you very much. Monthly financial report?
There is not a lot to update at this point. I will say that the sales tax has started to be collected. That was effective April 1, but we will not see those revenues for about 2 more months. So as of now, it still looks the same.
Any questions or comments regarding financial report? Seeing none, we will proceed. Item number 4, continued review of the draft NOFA and sample matrix. And we begin where with our memo? Yes, go ahead.
All right. Danielle Bushcutter. I'm back before you talking about this notice of funding availability. We tried to talk about it a little bit at the last month's meeting, but we had such good, robust conversation about the text amendment that we only had about 5 or 10 minutes to speak about this. So today I will give you more of a kind of comprehensive overview of what that NOFA looks like today. And we have made a few changes between our last meeting and today that I'll also highlight. So we added a memo that kind of walks through all of the different things that have changed. But just for kind of the folks at home, I'm not going to have that open. I'm going to actually point to the things that have changed here in the actual notice of funding availability. So we will get started with the introduction. Not a lot here has changed. This has stayed pretty similar throughout the past couple years, really just kind of updating the number that will be available. And we did try to further define housing affordability, indicating that it was households spending less than 30% of monthly gross income on housing, with housing being either a mortgage or rent payment along with those associated utilities. So we did include that to try to help provide additional clarity. The rest of this looks pretty similar. We did include a little bit of language in here indicating that applicants should be prepared to give a brief presentation. This is something that we did during the last process, but we didn't actually have it in the application, and so we thought instead of it being an email from me when they submit the application, it would be better if we let them know that ahead of time. So we did include that in there as well. All right, I mentioned this last time. We included the updated goals that you guys identified during the retreat process. So these goals are now in this notice of funding availability as well, kind of broken out in those same categories, the ongoing goal, short-term, and then long-term. So I'll scroll through that pretty quickly. Section 1 has one of the changes that we have made in the last month. So we included this additional language down here regarding partnerships. So we had a number of applications last time that had partnerships involved. And so this tries to help articulate that if there is a partnership, that we would like one agency to kind of serve as the primary agency. That way we can have an agreement just with one agency instead of an agreement with two separate agencies. Last time it was pretty easy to do this because the two different agencies involved in both of those applications had very clear kind of roles and responsibilities, but in the future it may not be quite as clear. So we thought this way kind of helps preempt that and kind of let applicants know that by and large we'd like to have one agreement with the primary agency instead of separating those two things out. Yeah.
Then if funded, does that mean that all funding goes through the primary agency and then they're responsible for going?
I think that's how it would probably look. And there may be, as we get into the actual agreement, room for that to be one of the terms of the agreement, to say even though this agency is ultimately responsible for getting together the final report and getting together all of those final materials, there may be room for that. I think it kind of depends on what the application looks like. But I think part of what we're trying to get at is it's a lot easier if you can have one person be your primary contact instead of trying to pull information from 2 or 3 different people.
And it appears to me that you have a concern about that.
Yeah,
So-
just for smaller.
Yeah, so that's, from your position, oh, it's easier if we have one.
Right.
From your position, tell me what, I'm interested in hearing what.
If Family Promise or a smaller agency were the primary identified partners, multiple partners, and we've been approached by others too for this, it would be a huge burden for us, just time-wise and
Resources.
accounting, all of
To-
that.
To be the primary agency.
It'd be more like a project manager and financial
Yep.
designee for all of that.
Yep.
It would be difficult.
Let me ask the question. Is there a not-for-profit agency in our community that would be a good home for those kinds of administrative and financial management functions? Well, I don't hear any volunteers. but-
Well,
I'm sorry?
Might be a good question for Chip Blazer.
No?
I mean, I don't know if they have that capacity, but it's one I can think of. that would be worth having a conversation with.
And not to argue with you, Dana, it's certainly an administrative burden. The good thing that I will say, having been allocated funds, is that the city does it in a lump sum generally. So it's not like managing a project where you're constantly getting reimbursed and then doling that out. So getting one lump sum and then giving it to another agency in one check might be easier than you're imagining. It depends on the project,
Right.
obviously, right?
And I think it depends on
Right.
the terms of the agreement too.
Yeah.
It's not to say that in that one agreement, we couldn't have a primary agency and say, by this date, the city will give X number to this agency and X number to that agency. I think from our perspective, it's more of having kind of a key contact person. Because, we have to deal with what if one of those entities can't fulfill that promise or can't, ends up going out of business or something like that. And then we're kind of liable for that. So I think from our perspective, those were some of the things that we're trying to, before we have a problem, address some of those things kind of that we can maybe foresee being something that could happen in the 10 years that we have this tax.
Another aspect of that for smaller agencies, speaking personally, of course, is the annual reports and the funding and such. These kinds of projects would take that exponentially higher than anything we've dealt with before.
Question regarding partners, would they need to list the partners that they are working with?
Yes. I think that would be the expectation. And I think it depends too on the level of partnership. If it's 95% of this project is gonna be managed by this one entity and they're gonna have a subcontractor for this portion of it, then maybe it doesn't need to be as clearly defined because they are clearly the primary on it. I think where we get into more of that difficulty is when half of the project is kind of in this arena and the other half is in another. So some of it is project specific.
Yes.
So, I'll just use some of our projects. So one is a housing assistant piece and the other is a support services piece. If something happens to, let's say, the support services piece and that function can no longer be done by that agency, I'm thinking about our agreement and I'm like, do we have the opportunity to cure and get a different person to come in to do that? Because, that's kind of one of those things where it's like, I don't necessarily want to be obligated for another agency's accurate spending of the portion of the money that goes to them. On the flip side, I don't want to have to kill a project and give the money back if I can cure and get somebody else to do a partner's piece.
And I think that's something that would have to come back to this board to say, hey, when you guys approved this project or recommended funding for this project, this was the scope. But because of this set of circumstances, we now either just want to change the entity that's providing that service or we need to change the scope in some way. So I think that's something that would have to come back to this board and ultimately be a recommendation from this board to kind of figure out how do we want to handle something like that. And hopefully it can be remedied because obviously if that was the intent of it, you want to keep the intent of the project intact. But I think that's something that would come back to you all and recommendations would be made.
Other questions at this time? Danielle, go ahead.
Okay. All right. The next section is section 2, the evaluation criteria. We updated this. After I get done presenting this, I'm going to kind of walk through recommended scoring matrix and kind of key project indicators. So we just updated this language to align with that. So not a whole lot is different, but we did get it so it better aligns with that proposed matrix that you will see. All right, section 3, this is where we kind of get at the information related to the actual request. The only change that we really made was in regards to the leverage ratio, and we added a couple what we think are hopefully some clarifying questions to try to get at if this project is fully funded, what percentage is coming from the trust fund, what percent is being leveraged and will be some other source of funding. So we tried to kind of add some clarifying questions here, so that's all that's really changed. All right.
Can I
Yeah.
ask you a question?
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
that? So is there, I mean, I do think you wanna add a requirement to say the other funding, committed, pending,
Mm-hmm, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, status of other funds.
yeah.
Okay.
That could fit really nicely in a pre-form.
Yes, 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 I would completely agree.
So that they're getting the same information and easy to view it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be easy enough to add kind of as a template under this question to say where are those funds at? So that we can certainly do that. Any other questions on this piece of it? Okay. Section 4, not a whole lot's changed, nothing's changed from the last time we presented it. But just as kind of a note, we did include the goals that you all have stated in prior applications. This was tied to the city's strategic plan, but now that you guys have clear goals articulated, we updated this section with those goals. All right, section 5, description of the project, and this is the section that has changed the most from the last time we presented this to you all. Instead of having two separate notices of funding availability, one for those capital projects and one for those non-capital projects, we decided in here just to break out the questions into different sections that try to get at those different needs. So in section 5A, these are the overarching questions that we want everybody to answer, regardless of what the project type is. Now, section 5B and 5C are much more dependent on the project. So if it's capital in nature, we are asking applicants to fill out section 5B. If it's non-capital in nature, we're asking them to fill out 5C. And if it's like some of the projects we've seen before where it has a little bit of both, then we're asking applicants to fill out both of those sections. So we thought this was a nice kind of blend between having two completely different applications when in reality, only this section would probably be different. So this was our way at kind of trying to articulate those two different project types.
I note that Erica Zimmerman, in the communications that she sent to the board, that was forwarded to board members, expressed a preference for having separate applications for capital and non-capital projects.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask other folks on the board, do they share that same concern? What are the experiences, particularly of those who have worked on affordable housing projects here in the community in the past? Is there a need for a separate application? Are the distinctions that are made in this application sufficient to recognize the differences between a capital and non-capital project? What are your
I
preferences?
think so, and I think the projects that we've kind of worked on, we'd have to duplicate an app, right? So I'd have to fill out a whole one for the capital part, and then I'd have to fill out a whole one
Then you'd have a component
for
for
the
the
service
non-capital
piece,
part.
and-
Okay.
And then one would be contingent upon the other,
Yeah,
potentially.
and I would want to, and the project is better described in those situations when you're pairing those,
Mhm.
so.
I don't want to speak for Erica, but I feel her concern was really making sure that we're asking the different questions for those two different types of applications, which I think
In order
this
to distinguish
does.
between them.
Right, and then distinguishing that we're supporting both kinds, right? That we're not just supporting one or the other. But I don't know that hers, I think this would suffice,
Mhm.
would deal with that,
I
is
would
my,
concur with that,
is
yeah.
my thought.
Any other comments on that point?
I
See.
think in that specific case, the three agencies that are represented here are the ones who are most equipped to answer that.
Mhm.
Since I've never had to do an application and I don't recall Monty have either. I think that that's the three agencies that are represented here that probably would have more pertinent input into how that process works.
Very good.
Okay,
Continue, please.
All right, section 6, this looks the same, so I'm not gonna really go over it. This is kind of the budget information. 7 also looks the same. We wanna make sure that there are clear objectives related to the project. Same thing with the equal opportunity portion of the agreement. This is just making sure that agencies know that this language will be included in the agreement. So that has not changed since the last time we presented this. So this is the budget form, the revenue form. One thing that I touched on last time, but because I'm going through the whole thing, I'm going to go through briefly again, is we added some additional language in here for some disclosures. So we did this to kind of tie with another application that we have in the city, which is for our economic development agreements and applications. So we took this language and included it here as well. So this is just some kind of key disclosure language to make sure that anyone applying for these funds don't have any outstanding taxes and things of that nature. So we have one on the for-profit side. We also have one on the not-for-profit side. And then we have this kind of application submission form that just indicates that the application being submitted is true to the applicant's best knowledge. And then an affidavit related to kind of the property tax side to make sure that there's no one applying for funds that is delinquent in their property taxes in the state of Kansas. So that is the application. Next, I kind of want to go over the matrix, but before I get to that, I'm happy to answer any questions on this side of
One
it.
question, and I may have missed it, but is there a place that talks or asks the question about the scalability of any project? Because as we get to a place like we had to last time and decide we're gonna spend money on this project and money on then split stuff up, it would be important to me to know whether the project is a go, no-go based on funding, or if it's scalable and can be changed in scope
Yes.
and still.
In-
And I recall seeing that before,
In
but
section
Okay.
3, yep.
I just missed it then.
Last question, section 3 is what is the impact of partially
Yeah,
funding your
good.
request?
Yeah. Is that how we want to ask that, or do we want to imply that it should be, if it's scalable or not? Or does that get to the point? I guess I'm asking you guys primarily.
It was an easy question to answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So it might be an easy question to answer, but does that get to your objective?
Does that help us?
Yeah, does
when
that-
we're evaluating the projects?
And I think that's, goes to the question I asked before, which is, show me what money you have committed, what you're still waiting for, because quite frankly, if you come in with a project and you only get part of it, well, now I gotta find more money from somewhere else. I still may be wanting to do that, but it may delay my project, right?
Right.
Because I may have
Or
to.
it could impact the size?
And I mean, Rebecca can attest to this, that's the reality of the way these projects work is, it's gonna be rare, somebody standing here with my
All the pieces of the
leverage.
same day.
Yeah, you know, with all my leverage, all my match, everything in hand, and I'm just coming and asking you for this piece or whatever, it's like, you know, we're
Somebody has to make the first piece happen.
It
right?
does seem like we do have the,
Mhm.
on this page, on the budget,
Mhm.
it does say amount applied, amount awarded as of a date, and date of notification, so that we can see.
Which section is that?
That's the
That's the
project
project budget
revenue. It's kind of gives you, which was really helpful when we filled these out before, right? Saying, okay, because then you guys can see, oh, we've got these 3 pieces, but this one we applied for, but we won't hear till next, in 3 months. But I do like Monty's point of scalability of like, what pieces can we do, whether or not we get a funding we're waiting on,
Right.
or what level can we, whether we'd serve half as many clients if we
Right, well, I
got
think
half the
it's-
funds.
If part of our evaluation is how many units are being created or whatever.
Mhm. I would
You
be
know,
very
That
comfortable.
would be
Yeah.
an important factor in funding that's not obtained yet or secured yet. you know, and what happens, because that number, you know, suddenly is cut in half, and we've made an evaluation, you know, giving somebody points or whatever, however we're gonna do that for 100 units, and all of a sudden the project's 50, or we can only fund part of it, and then how, what's that number become? I'm just trying to avoid a
I
a
would
tough
be, I would
decision
be
later.
very receptive to a question immediately in front of what is the impact of partially funding that says, is your project scalable?
It's fine.
My experience has been, I understand the desire of a board to partially fund a grant.
Mhm.
I also think it avoids some tough decisions sometimes.
Right.
And I think as someone who has applied for them and been given partials, you're never gonna say no to partial, but you have to, sometimes you'd rather the board make the decision to either fund it or not, and partial can put you in a real spot, because then you might not even be able to use what you've been granted
Mhm.
because you got partial. I mean, that's just my perspective. You guys know better than I do. I think that's a tough question to ask an organization. Is it scalable better? Then what would you do with partial funding? Well, maybe you should ask for more and then hope they partially fund you, you know? It becomes sort of a game of chicken.
Yeah.
Well,
Which
and
is a good process.
as Amy can attest to, that's what we do, right? I mean, that's I mean, when you go to outside agency funding, you going with my highest request, because I know we won't have that much money and we'll get X%, and can I do, you know? I mean, that's. the
You're not
way-
alone, state budgets budget the same way,
Right.
state agencies budget the same
Yeah.
way.
Tom?
But I want to comment, Patrick, your observation, I think, is correct, but it's entirely situational.
Sure.
Last fall, we ended up funding 2 projects that scored the same on our final average score from the board. One was a smaller project. The other would have used all of the funds that were available. They scored the same. We fully funded the smaller project. We partially funded the larger project. That was not the easy way out, because we took a lot of pushback, ultimately from the commission, for scoring one of the, for equally scoring them, but then not equally funding them, or they wanted some other explanation for why we prioritized the funds that we did. I don't know that this format we're entering into here prevents that from happening, or provides any kind of explanation that's going to be easier to understand. If we were back in that same situation today that we were in, was that November meeting, December meeting?
Yeah.
Even with
somewhere in
all
there.
of the input we've had provided by folks, I would probably make exactly the same determination that I did last fall in the way I would have distributed those funds. And trust me, it's not because that was the easy way to do it. I think it's a very valid concern, but I think it's also very situational. We're going to have some projects, I suspect, that are very scalable.
It
And,
sounds like
and others that aren't at all.
getting as much information, which gets to your other question worded a little differently, I think is great. That way you
Yeah.
have all 3 of those answers. And I guess it does behoove nonprofits, or applicants, I should say, whether for-profit or non, to be honest about what they need and what they can do with it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which unfortunately, you're totally right. We sometimes, we'll only get half, so we'll ask for double. But maybe we set that precedent that people, if we can be honest, will choose based on these answers, right?
Mhm.
It's probably the best we can do with that.
I like the language scalable better than partially funded,
Yeah.
because that means really thinking about, you know, how I would use
What
those dollars
pieces?
rather than, I got something, so,
Yeah.
thanks, I appreciate the background on your decision making, that's helpful to me.
Well, and I think with scalable, then we can follow up with that question and say, how could you scale it, right? As opposed to, if they say yes, then when we're doing the interview, you know, the presentation, you can kind of say, okay, explain how this is you say it's
That's a good
scalable,
idea.
please explain.
Yeah.
Or I would put it in here,
Yeah.
because then you're getting into the partial funding thing. We as a board need to, if we're giving partial funding on things, we need to understand the risk of the investment too. So if they just say, yeah, I mean, I think we need more than just, is it scalable? How?
Is it
So,
scalable and how?
please describe.
And
Right.
describe the impact to the project or something like that.
And we might be able to kind of blend those two questions together to say, you know, to what extent is the project that you're proposing scalable, and please articulate what that might look like if partial funding was received, or something to that effect, where we can kind of, I think, get at both of those things in one question, if there's consensus from the board on that.
Is it helpful to say some projects may be partially funded? Or is that not necessary?
I'm comfortable saying that. That's been the history of this grant program. So,
All of them.
It's all grants.
It's
Yeah,
all
we
of them.
might as
Yeah.
well say it
Oh, I
out
think-
there.
yeah.
If we're asking agencies to be honest about it, I think
Yeah,
it's
well-
only fair that the board
let's be
says,
transparent.
let's be frank about this. You may not get the full funding that you asked for, so
Yeah.
If you
I think
answer
that'd be
no,
good.
you might, I mean, unless your proposal's the number one, you're taking a risk,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Mhm.
But that may be the correct answer
Well, it
for a
does help.
particular project.
It does help agencies think about how can I scale this with if there's not enough resources, which there never is. But I kind of like that question myself, because then you have to think about how are you going to do that? What can you still do?
Mhm.
So it's a good process.
And from this board standpoint, we're probably going to want to distribute all of the money we can. So you might, fully fund one or two projects, and you're still gonna have something left over, and again, something might be better than nothing,
Absolutely.
if we decide we want to award that at
Yeah.
that time. So as we get into these $1 million awards, it's gonna look different than our
Yeah, oh, definitely.
$60,000 awards, right?
Right.
It's gonna be a different landscape.
Does that give you sufficient direction?
It does, yep. All right, so I will get into kind of the matrix, so the scoring component of it. I think in a lot of ways, what we tried to do was kind of blend the matrix that we had used previously with like the matrices that Justice Matters has presented to you all. I think that was back in August of 18. So we tried to kind of blend those two things together. And what we came up with and what we're kind of proposing to you all is this scoring matrix that you see, and we do have a separate one for capital projects versus non-capital projects. But the only difference between the two is that last section on construction feasibility, which then changes kind of the weighting criteria, but functionally the rest of, let me make it a little bit smaller so you can see the weighting. But the rest of the application is the same. So what we have kind of proposed is the first category being the alignment with the stated goals that you all have identified with a weight of 25%. And it's low alignment to high alignment. Leverage ratio, and that's weighted at 20%. And that goes from, a large component of city support down to a smaller leverage ratio. Qualifications, this is below average, average, or above average, and it relates to the project being proposed. So those qualifications look different depending on what's being proposed. And then we tried to get at kind of the financial capacity of the organization. So it gets at whether or not there are major concerns, some concerns, or a high likelihood that the agency has the financial capacity to complete the stated project. And I think that gets back to some of the things that we've talked about before, with some of those identifying the different revenue sources that some of these applications have. If it's, you don't think there's a high likelihood that it's going to proceed, even if you give it, full funding, I think that's something that here you can kind of capture that component of it. And then the construction feasibility, and again, this is just on the capital side, but this is kind of where is it on that construction process? Is it just a concept and an idea, or are they already to the process where they're pulling permits, they've done their site planning, and where are they kind of on that process? So this is what we have proposed and kind of the weight that goes with it. But the other thing that we also wanted to include, and I'm going to scroll down, are these key project elements. So these are things that aren't scored. You're not going to get a score of 1 to 10, but I think it is kind of a good, hopefully a good summary sheet to be able to look at all of these projects side to side. So this is where you'd get the number from, you know, each of the projects that were submitted. And it tries to get at what is the amount that was actually requested, what does that leverage ratio look like, what percent of AMI is being served, how close is it to public transit, what type of project is it, number of units created, how long it'll be affordable, the amount of trust fund dollars requested per bedroom created, whether it's rentalship or ownership, and then if it's supportive services, how long will those supportive services be in place? And then the next one tries to get at capturing the vouchers. So either how long will those be in place or the number of units those vouchers will impact. So again, this is something that I think can help kind of be a conversation starter. We tried to pull some of the things that we saw from the Fort Collins kind of guidelines that they have. We also pulled some of these from the proposed matrix that Justice Matters has to try to get at, maybe we don't want a number tied to each of these things, and maybe you do, maybe we move it up to the scoring matrix, but some of those kind of key elements that might be a good kind of starting point for discussion for you all as you're reviewing these applications and trying to compare apples and oranges, and this gives you kind of a summary.
Question
Yes,
about how the matrix would work.
yes,
So let's create a hypothetical.
all right,
The hypothetical is we've got a project that comes in with average alignment, average city support, average qualifications. Yeah, all of the scores for all 5 categories are in the center column.
okay,
Okay? And pick a number for any of those to represent the center score, a 5 or a 6. Well, okay, so let's say my project gets a 6 on alignment, and it's got a 25% weighting. What does a 6 for a 25% weighting represent metrically?
so
So I got 6 points out of 10, and this is 25% weighting. It's the heaviest weighting of
Mhm.
any of the 5 categories. So do I end up, I mean, is this simply a math problem if I take my 6 times the 25%, and I've now got 1.5 over here in a column to the right?
I think the way that for me it's easiest to kind of conceptualize this is you'd have your 6 here. So in this total column, there's 100 points possible. And then we'll take that by the 25%, and then in that next column, it'll essentially be out of 1,000 points. So we'll just increase that, the scalability by 1 decimal point. So then you can kind of see, okay, so, you know, it's a 6 times 25%, and then you get basically a new score with the weighting calculated.
And what is that score? Is it 1.5? Is it 15?
It depends how you guys want to. It depends on how you guys want to see it. So each board member would fill this out, and then we would compile all of these.
And I mean, I'm not asking my question correctly because your answer's not responsive, and I know it's
Okay.
not because you're not trying.
I just don't want to. No.
Yeah, no.
No way.
How do we get to the number as we come across, alignment with stated goals? So I gave it a 6, okay? You said there's 100 points or 1,000 points. Well, so let's say it's 100 points.
Would it help
And
if we brought
25% of the weighting of 100 points would be 25 points. But I just gave it a 6.
Would it help if we brought back a spreadsheet that actually you could type in and see
Yeah.
how it would relate.
And I want that to actually evaluate, like, I want you to do the math on
Yes,
an Excel
yes.
spreadsheet for me.
And that's how we would have
Me
it.
trying to take 25%.
Do we have the time to do that prior to this going out?
We can certainly,
Right,
as
can
you're
I make a
talking about your
suggestion?
next item, I can try to put it together.
Can I make a
The
suggestion?
quick
Yeah,
updates.
sure.
If we, I mean, and this would be a discussion for the board, but if we changed the top one to 20 and the one that's 15 to 20, they would all be the same. We just wipe out
There would be no
the
waiting.
weighting.
Yep.
We'd get a score and it'd be easy for the public and everybody else to understand. You either got a 6 or you got a 6. You're not some 6 weighted score. Now, the discussion is whether you want to place more importance on alignment with growth than financial,
Right.
financial capacity, whatever you call it.
And I think that's where the discussion
Make it
makes
a
the
lot
most
simpler to
sense.
understand.
Yeah.
Do you
Everybody.
want to have things weighted more than other things? And if
Yeah.
you do, then we can come back and say, okay, this is how it looks. This is how the math works.
Well, and I do think alignment with stated goals is the most important thing. That's why we're like, what percentage of AMI and how many units and who are you gonna serve? I mean, I do think that is one of our most important tasks to determine, is this really affordable housing?
And as you just suggested, so our assessment of how aligned you are with stated goals would include metrics like how many units are you creating? How many people are you serving? Is that for a 6-month period of time, a year time, a 3-year period of time?
Right.
Are you creating a permanently affordable unit or a unit that's affordable for a limited amount of time? All of that in your mind would go into the alignment with stated goals type of analysis?
Yeah.
I like to see your head nod yes, because I've been asking myself, where did those metrics come
Yeah.
into?
To
And
me,
some of
that's
that gets
that.
picked up on
And-
this comparison sheet.
Yeah,
But-
to me, that's that.
So
Okay.
you can
And
also-
leverage too.
Another way to do that is to pick up 2 of those elements from that sheet and bring them up and give them points.
Mm-hmm.
You could say number of units created and give it a 1 to 10, and you could create permanently affordable and either give it a 5 or a 10 or whatever you want to do.
And when we.
And that would add points and also give that more weight to meeting our goals.
And that may be exactly what we need to do, but what I'm aware of is that when you pick those metrics and you elevate them and say, okay, number of units is one of our 6 or 7 criteria. Well, you've taken certain kinds of programs that deal with low numbers of units, individual families putting them in homes, and suddenly you've put them at a tremendous disadvantage of competing against programs that might be much shorter length time benefit, but are serving dozens or scores of. So
So you could-
which metric you pick
Is important.
is important.
Yeah. And you could say number of people impacted or something like that, which would get to the service side of it too. Instead of units created, how many families are impacted? Or something, some other, I mean, these guys probably have a better idea than I do, but you could pick a little bit different metric to get at that and not penalize. But I think if you think, if you have a project that's gonna impact 1 family versus 20, one's gotta be weighted. I mean, to me, our job is to create these units.
Yeah, but I think what,
I
I see
to
what
some
Ron's
extent.
saying is how do I weigh 1 family,
Mhm.
but in perpetuity affordable, and 20 families, but only affordable for 15 years?
Right.
How? Right?
Right.
How do I, and I think that is the place where all of it, like, we take these alignment with stated goals, and when I'm going to vote, I have to be able to stand behind my vote and say, look, last funding cycle, we did 45 units of this kind. I think as a balance, I'm going for the single-family home because that is also a very important thing. And that's why I rated it 10 in that category this time. because I don't think we can ever get down to, I mean, at some point, we have to use our discernment on what have we already done, what don't we have, what, that kind of thing. And as long as we're willing to say, on my paper, here's why, and I say in the meeting, I'm voting this way because of, I make this motion, or I do this thing because here's why. I think then we get to the commission's concern about, tell us why you're doing what you're doing. And also, we're still, I mean, they put us on here because we have to be able to make some hard decisions.
Mhm.
And I'm comfortable with that.
Other comments? Questions? Go right ahead.
Okay. All right, so the final piece that I will go over is this Affordable Housing Advisory Board Notice of Funding Availability, Application Process and Procedure. So a really long name, but essentially it tries to give some process and procedures as we look at bringing forward notices of funding availability. Yeah.
So since you specifically mentioned the name, I want to ask the silly question. Probably doesn't require a lot of discussion, but RFP versus NOFA, that's not going to throw people off the track or what they're used to seeing, correct?
Our intent with this was, I think in the nonprofit world, the notice of funding availability is a lot more
Common?
than the RFP. So that's why we made the switch.
And honestly, it's even more important than that. RFP is work you're gonna do for me. Funding is work you're gonna do,
Yep.
not for me,
Mm-hmm.
not mine,
Yep.
yours.
Yeah. So that's yeah, I should have mentioned that at the front. That's where kind of the naming change happened in the last month as we started having those conversations, and thought a NOFA was a little bit more appropriate to what you guys are actually trying to get at. Yeah, good question. Okay, so I'm gonna try to go through this relatively quickly, but it is something new and I think is
And Danielle, let me hit pause
Yes.
button for just a moment, just to let everyone know, we have a hard stop today at 12:30. Commission's coming in here at 1 o'clock to conduct interviews with the city manager finalists, and we're not gonna get in the way of that.
so I
Not
will
that we
try to be
ever
real
would,
quick.
but
All right, so I will really try to be brief with this. So this kind of walks through the general process of issuing a NOFA, and so this just tries to get at that. Generally speaking, there will be one round of funding per year, with the exception made by this board as it deems appropriate, such as in 19 we're doing 2 of these. But as a general practice, 1 year funding. Hopefully the intent is to have the applications open for 1 month to give people enough time to actually fill them out, ask questions to get back to, get the application submitted. States that we'll have it up on our website, as well as we'll try to get it out on Demand Star and send it out through email notifications as well. And then the final point is that it will specify the goals that the board has, and also gives you guys an opportunity, if you want to have the discussion between targeted allocations between capital and non-capital. There's some language in here to give you all kind of the flexibility if you wanted to, going into an going into a NOFA, to say we want approximately X percentage to be related to capital needs, and we want Y percentage to be related to kind of those non-capital needs. So that language is in here.
let's get some feedback from the board on just that issue. What are your preferences on this spring financing availability process? Do we want to designate any or all of this as being capital or non-capital, or leave it completely undesignated to see what comes in?
I think it would make sense to see what comes in. I don't know why you would want to limit it.
Mhm.
I mean, since this is not our first round, but our second, I mean, it's an inaugural piece of the puzzle, I think it makes sense to see what comes in.
Everyone comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
Questions, we will post those questions and answers on the AHAB webpage, and also email those out to the the applicant list, or to the notification list. All right, so this is the part that I think there will probably be the most discussion on. So I'm going to kind of walk through it step by step, just so that we're all kind of on the same page with it. So this first part is kind of the process for it. So generally, AHAB will review these applications over the course of 2 meetings, unless otherwise specified. The first meeting will really give you all an opportunity to hear from the applicants when they present, ask questions, and have that kind of dialogue back and forth. It is noted that if an AHAB member misses this first meeting, that they will be required to watch the video of it in order to participate in the scoring process and the deliberations, just to make sure that everybody has the same, they're working with the same set of information. All right, so that second meeting, this is when you all will actually make the recommendations to the City Commission. We will tabulate the scores between that first and second meeting and have those available. And I think that can kind of be the starting point for that deliberation. And then obviously if more time or another meeting is needed, that's absolutely up to the prerogative of this board, and those accommodations can certainly be made.
Danielle, under
Yeah.
item number 3, there's reference to the second meetings being scheduled closely behind the first. You're expecting still just monthly meetings. I mean, we carry over till the next regularly scheduled meeting the decision on the projects we heard.
You could, or you could say, we want to meet in 2 weeks, and kind of cancel that next monthly meeting, and that way it's still fresh in everybody's mind. So I've helped with boards that have done it both ways. Some boards keep their regularly scheduled meetings, and others say, we don't really want 4 weeks in between when we heard everything and when we really get into some of that discussion. So let's give ourselves 2 weeks to kind of sit with this and then come back.
And I'm perfectly fine with coming back earlier, but I don't want us to mislead folks if we decide to wait till the next regularly scheduled monthly meeting. They go, well, that wasn't scheduled closely behind. Okay,
I get, part of it is the
vagueness
preference of
language.
this board. I don't know if there's a strong
Everyone
preference
else?
one way or the other.
Okay,
I would
Thank you.
say that what we do as a board is not much more important than this kind of thing. So
Mhm.
much quicker, and having
Mhm.
a review period that doesn't expand over 2 or 3 months is beneficial for
Yes.
our community.
okay, good.
Okay, great. Point 4 gets at that, so you guys aren't having to run all the numbers and calculate everything, and we don't have 3 different people calculating things in 3 different ways. That staff will kind of fill out that key project element chart and bring that back. So we'll have a draft at that first meeting, and then as staff have questions and need refinement, that'll be some of the questions that we ask of applicants. And then we'll have kind of that final version at that second meeting. Okay, so number 5, in between those 2 meetings, we're asking AHAB members who want to participate in the final recommendation to complete the scoring and submit that to staff so that we have time to calculate the scoring. So this helps us have that kind of commonality across the different board members. If scoring is not submitted by a particular board member, then they will not be able to participate in the discussion or the vote, because we want that to be kind of the starting point that we start those deliberations from. So that's kind of point 5. Are there any questions on that? Okay. 6 kind of builds on that a little bit, in that the score sheets will be initialed by each board member, open and accessible to the public. And in this, we'll make sure to have you all indicate that you've read the proposals, you either participated in that first meeting or watched the video if you weren't able to be there. And then those score sheets will be compiled by staff and presented to you all at that second meeting, so that you're kind of working from the same set of information.
Is the public disclosure of individual board members' scoring, is that consistent with what's done with other advisory boards for the City Commission?
I'm trying to think, there's I can think of at least three different boards that give funding recommendations, and I think they all do it a little bit differently. I don't know if Danny can talk about the CDAC. The board that I help with, if you come to the meeting, it's known, but we don't necessarily have the scores available like that. Not to say that we wouldn't. People are pretty open about it, but I don't know how CDAC works.
We actually don't do a matrix
Okay.
with our discussion, so it's just all in the minutes.
Okay.
So
And then I know the transient guest tax board, I think they have a matrix, but I'm not sure, I'm not sure on that one.
Once again, I'm not very clear. I'm not talking about the matrix, I'm talking about the individual board members' scoring sheets.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. So a lot of different boards have a matrix of some sort, and then they get the board to score them. I don't know to the extent that, like, the TGT grant has those individual scores made public. We talk about it at our social service funding advisory boards, but it's not, we don't have the scoring matrix and say, this is Joe Smith's, this is Jane Smith's. So we talk about it in the meeting, but it's not as clear as what we're proposing here.
Okay.
So I'm just interested, as an elected official, I don't care if you put my name on it, I don't want you to put my name on it, but as some of our volunteers here, I just want to think through that, if that's, what would be the rationale behind that?
And I think I don't know, are you asking staff or board members?
I'm asking whoever wants to answer.
I would say from the staff, I'll give you the staff perspective and then feel free to push right back. From the staff perspective, we came at it from the aspect of being transparent and coming at this process to say, if you want everything, here's everything. So that was kind of our thought process and logic behind why we included that. It's just kind of from that transparency perspective. But I think I knew this would be kind of one of those key points for the board, so I'm curious to hear the thoughts that you guys have on this.
So if we turn in our score sheets individually, obviously that becomes a public record through Open Records Act.
Yep.
But somebody would have, if somebody wanted to dig down to that level, they would have to make that request. Could we just simply publish?
And you'd have to initial your score sheet.
And I think the intent is that it would
Right.
be one package deal. So we wouldn't require somebody to go through a Kansas Open Records request to access
No, what
that.
I'm suggesting is the average, the final average could be published readily available to everyone, so everybody could see the scores. But then the individual ones would only be available through a public records ask. That would give you one level, the other level would be to not initial.
I mean, how would this
Your
be
score.
different than if we did a voice vote? Right? I mean, how would this be different? And I kind of agree that I think we should be very transparent. And I've been to a lot of the Community Development Advisory Board. And they sit up there and they say, I don't want to fund a beacon on 15th, I want to do this other thing, right? I mean, and they have that discussion and it is going to be recorded in their minutes. They don't do a matrix like this where they sign it, but it's everybody in favor, it's these four, and everybody opposed, it's these three, and...
I'm trying to get to a little bit different nuanced issue.
Okay.
I'm very supportive of transparency in our decision-making. But the result of our matrix scoring is going to put these projects in an array, okay?
Right.
And our highest ranked project maybe gets an 80. And number 2 is 75, and number 3 drops down, say 65. Have we said now the project with the highest score is going to get funded? No, we haven't said that? We haven't said that, okay? Now, and what's the response going to be from commissioners when they say, your project that got the highest score didn't get funded? Well, why the hell didn't you fund your project that got the highest score? Help me understand. And then we're going to say, well, there's a number of subjective determinations, factors that were weighed. Last year we had a couple other projects that looked like this one, so we wanted to do something different. So even though it scored 85 points, you know, this is where I'm struggling with this combination of a hard metric that's going to lead the commission and lead the public, I think, to believe, well, we've come up with a very finite system for we're going to score these, and whoever comes out on top is going to get funding. But that's not really our intention, is it? I mean, there's still going to be, you know, I may decide, for example, that somebody that looks like, you know, comes in with low alignment on financial capacity, major concerns with the agency's financial capacity to complete the stated project. They could have perfect scores in every other category, but I may have concerns about giving money to an agency that's not demonstrated the ability to complete the stated project. So even though it's scored high, absent the financial capacity number, I'm not going to put them on my top 3 or 4 projects. Then why have we created this metric?
No, I see.
Why aren't we doing what community development block grants are doing? And I mean, the process has never, and that's why I was asking the questions earlier about how does this matrix work? Because I'm concerned that the development of the matrix is going to lead people to believe that the scoring is the evaluation, and that's that determines the recommendations.
And I think that was our exact intent with having both sides of it. Because the matrix is, I think, the starting point of that discussion and conversation. And it allows you to say, even though this project hit, 10 out of 10 on 4 of these metrics, it doesn't achieve this, and that's why we're uncomfortable. So I think that's why we tried to balance those two things to say, this matrix provides you all a starting point to have that discussion. And that's why you have all of those other kind of key project elements to tie into that, to say, this is not the end-all be-all. Because so many of these projects are going to be different, and you're ultimately going to have to compare apples and oranges, because you have one pot of money, and these projects, I anticipate over time, are going to look very, very different. And they're not all going to score well, even if it's something that maybe really, really aligns with your goals, but maybe doesn't fit some of those other categories in quite the right way. So I view it as a starting point for that discussion, and something that you guys can kind of start your conversation from, not the end-all be-all to say, all right, we have the matrix, we're done, thank you, board, for your time. That's why we have it structured in those 2 meetings. Because if we just wanted it to be fill out a matrix and there was nothing after that, then we would structure how we have this set up quite a bit. But I don't think that's the intent.
That's gotta carry a big chunk of weight though, doesn't it? This matrix exercise.
Yeah,
That's the whole point of it, to sort out.
David?
What if we just put on the bottom line of each of these capital, non-capital concerns and observations as the final section? It doesn't have it, it's just notes where we all have that ability to say, scores high, however concerned we funded this last year, or something like that, no?
No, I'm just thinking through I haven't been through your process, so I'm trying to think that
Either way.
through. I mean,
But if we're
if the
gonna
idea is that it's a draft or a starting point, then having everybody assign their name to it I don't get that part. And it should be clear within the procedures here that it is a first pass, and then everybody can go in and rescore it so that, and actually, I don't think that's such a bad thing. In some of the other grant reviews I've done, I've sort of pre-scored it in pencil, and then I sit around with other board members or whoever's deciding, and we talk about it, and I go, oh, didn't think about scratch, and I change my number. Because quite honestly, I got input that I didn't have before
Sure,
when I
right.
first read through it. But I think that needs to be articulated, and then the
in this
scores may
process.
line up. Because if I was the city commission and you had given your highest score to this group and then you didn't fund them, I would have a lot of questions. I think that's very hard for the public to understand. However, if your scores then matched up based on how you talked about it, I think it's sort of I don't know what I think of that. That's it.
So you're suggesting that we all fill out our own and keep it to ourselves. We come to this table and we sit here and we go, this criteria, do we agree that that's an 8? and we get consensus around the table and we score them as a group?
It just depends on, as a group, what you wanna do.
I like that approach better than just everyone independently scoring it.
Yeah.
We average up the numbers, and then that's our number.
Right, because my pet peeve might be number of units, and Rebecca's might be, I don't know,
Proximity to
a
transportation.
certain class
Yeah.
class of individuals we're trying to serve.
Well,
you know?
There's gotta be some value though to different scores from different points of view, instead of just a consensus number.
Definitely.
Which would be revealed during a discussion. I mean,
Because you'd be fighting for a high score or a low score on any individual point.
Wasn't part of the issue that, let's be honest, we're addressing some of the questions that came up from the commission last time,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
That, some of it is, how do we articulate, whether it's a scoring matrix or a paragraph in the minutes that is well-defined, of how we went from the matrix to our final decision, right? Isn't that what we're trying to get at?
I think
And so
so.
I like that.
A component of it. a
Right,
big
of
component
how
it.
do we, yeah, we start with that, and how do we
Yeah.
articulate, and it maybe isn't a matrix, but a pretty descriptive articulation of those nuances we then made different decisions
At
on.
least we're comparing the same points.
Well, and
You know,
I
important
will
points of
say,
view.
from having a conversation with staff, the other concern was, if you're gonna vote, you need to have read all these proposals. And the part
Absolutely.
where they're saying, you fill this out, you tell us you've read all, and so part of it is, hey, if you're coming here and you're gonna vote, you gotta do all the work. And
Mhm.
so,
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know how we do all the adding and subtract, I mean, I don't, but at some point, we need to, if you're gonna vote, you have to say, yes, I've read them all.
Mhm.
And I think that's a piece of this, is getting to this, but maybe we don't collate, right? Maybe we all do whatever, and
And I know what we've done with some other boards is we got all of the matrices filled out from everybody. And then the thing that it helps with is to say, all right, we all agree that this is a 10 on financial capacity. So we don't have to spend a lot of time as a board talking about why we all think that's a 10. So I think one of the things that having those kind of score sheets ahead of time before that second meeting is it helps kind of pinpoint some of those discussion points to say, we were all over the place on this one project or this one element of the project. Let's focus our discussion there. So I think that's one of the things that helps, having those score sheets ahead of time and give you all an opportunity to look at those before that second meeting to say, okay, maybe we don't need to spend a whole lot of time talking about this, this, or this. Let's focus our discussions on these things where there's not a lot of alignment. So I think that's part of it too, is focusing that discussion.
Can we call that in the process then, like Pat was saying, a draft metrics tool or something like that, that shows it's not a final, it's just our initial gut, so
And-
that we can have the conversation around the table in the subsequent meeting.
And what about outliers? Let's say 9 of us score something, a project a 7, and we got one person who scores it a 1,
Right,
and one person scores it a 10.
right.
I don't want the average of all that, right? I don't want the average of all that to be, I don't want outliers to skew things. That's sort of.
Which was one of the things that was
Right.
raised as an objection to what we did last fall, because one of the projects had received at one point in time, like, the lowest possible rating from one member of the board, or something like that. I don't remember what the particulars were. And folks were like, well, why, help us understand how that number impacted the decision. I'm very comfortable with this notion of the matrix as a starting point, and this number that's created is for the purposes of making a rough comparison. I'm also very comfortable with the numbers don't determine the funding priority. They give us a good snapshot of the overall project, but then we've got to still come back in and create our own funding priorities based on our goals.
Yep, I agree with
Then,
Yes, ma'am.
then our approval of that has to clearly state the funding recommendations and the reason why.
Yes,
We
I
can't
agree.
just say aye and we have to really understand what it is we're approving and why.
Mm-hmm.
So, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah.
If, I think as we, as a society, I don't want to get all my soapbox here, but I do think that there is certainly a temptation to find numbers to tell the story. And I get that pressure, and that's an easy way for us to make judgment calls is with numbers. But if the highest numbers always led, we'd always be doing what we've always done, right? And so I think it's important to hear those outside voices, that voice that maybe says, hey, I really thought this was a great project, even though none of you did. It's because I have this information and let me share it with you, which may then cause the rest of us who now have that information to elevate that idea. It's a very equitable process, which I'm always shooting for.
Thinking about the matrix and the number, to get away from the number, one of the other cities that we looked at as an example didn't use numbers. They said poorly aligned, strong, moderately aligned, and strongly aligned, or whatever the language was.
Fort Collins?
Maybe it
Colorado
was.
Springs?
Fort Collins doesn't have numbers. It is that project, that key project element sheet
Yeah.
in a more
But
robust form.
that lends itself to starting a conversation as opposed to this one scored a 10 or a 7.
So if you have low alignment, average alignment, and high alignment.
Right.
It might be that the
Just
report back
maybe
from
just
staff
circle
says the overall vote here as a group was maybe towards low or high alignment. I mean, that's actually
just
a
strip the
pretty
numbers out
large,
of it.
especially in the low alignment category. You can go from 1 to 4. There's some math I think we should look at there. But yeah, because 1 to 4 is a big number versus 8 to 10. So
Well, and maybe we do that, I mean, that, at least you get into, here's tier 1, here's tier 2, here's tier 3, all these projects are equally in tier 3, regardless of whatever they're, right, and then we're kind of, do you see, I mean, so it's a.
And then you add the second part of that, and you've got some kind of numerical facts to put with that, and you've got this kind of base data of how those, a way to compare all the projects.
The project element sheet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You compare all of those factors with none of them really having a number assigned.
Yeah, because I
And then we have a
don't know how I'm
discussion.
gonna decide between giving somebody a 2 and giving them a 4. I mean, right? I mean, that's,
But you
and
could
my
throw
my
it in
4 might be your 2,
Yeah.
and,
But you could throw it in a broad.
but I could
bucket.
throw it in a, this
Low,
isn't very
medium,
well
low.
aligned bucket. So,
We're providing you the feedback you need.
Feedback is good. Direction, I think, is still a little scattered.
Does everyone, I'll just kind of run through a couple of the issues. You want your scoring sheets with initials in the files available to the public?
I'm fine with it.
Okay, okay. Do you have a sense that that the process the applicant will go through, is it adequately clear based on this application that the metric from the scoring sheet is not the final determinant?
We could certainly add clarifying language.
If we could just have some clarifying language that the project will be analyzed by each board member against a matrix and to develop an overall score, and the matrix will be an important component in evaluating funding for the project. An important component. Is that kind of language people are comfortable with? Or the important component? I mean, how high of a priority do you want to, what kind of expectation do you want project applicants to have?
In the spirit of weighting it, how much, if we're not gonna say this isn't the factor, how do we spell out what weight this matrix has, and how do we tell applicants, we're just gonna tell them the rest of the weighted factor is just subject to discussion, or the committee, or?
Oh, no, I think the point was already made very well. when we make the final decisions, we're gonna have to provide a very clear narrative of why something ranked higher and.
But should they be aware of that prior, of what those, how they're gonna be judged? If it's not just the matrix, how?
What about this? What if we change the points to 1, 2, or 3, right? So if I think you're highly aligned, I think everybody's a 3. If I say I think you're highly aligned, you get a 3. That way, I don't have all this weird disparity because I gave them a 9, somebody else gave them an 8, and now we're doing the
They're
weird.
either aligned or they're not.
They're either,
Mhm.
Or
and
they're
so
moderately
it's
aligned.
1, 2, or 3, then we come out, right, with, people are ranked, but everybody in that highly aligned category has the same number.
Mhm.
Then we have plenty of room for
And then we can
discussion.
talk about
Yeah.
why we pick A over B.
I'm a
I
little
like
bit more
that.
comfortable with kind of simplifying the math that way. What do you think? Others?
Yeah,
I
I like
am.
that a
The
lot.
math is certainly better there
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
4 options on the left.
But it still gets to a number rather than a bucket.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then a sentence that says that, you know, allocation beyond that depends on the request, the amount requested versus the amount we have and our goals and how each of those align
And the other
in
projects.
context with each other.
And, yeah,
right?
and the other
Yeah.
projects that are in front of us.
Which is
A
basically, we
project
can't
that
tell you.
is not successful in the spring may come back in the fall and be very successful. Yeah.
And we do have some language in, if you look up in section 2, our evaluation criteria, it is very broad in nature and just
Yeah.
says
Yes.
it will be, you know, judged based on the merits of the project, and these are the general categories we're gonna look at, but it leaves it really open-ended. So if you're comfortable with that language, we can just attach the matrix with, I'm hearing 1, 2, 3 as the scoring instead of a 1 to 10. Is that the consensus?
I want us to very quickly, and I know we're running out of time, I want us to very quickly get to, can we conclude that discussion then on the NOFA?
Yes.
Quickly then on quick updates, can you provide us an update on the Affordable Housing Tax Amendment? And also, everyone had a chance to look at the correspondence that's been received on the text amendment and also the Plan 2040. Bobby Flory already referenced their correspondence regarding Plan 2040.
Yep.
Yes, Scott?
Sure.
Okay, 90 seconds, buddy.
No, I think we've got just a few minutes.
Yeah.
So the Affordable Housing Text Amendment came to this body last month, and it also then, a couple of weeks later, went to the Planning Commission for, at a time which was a very late night for them. So it didn't get a whole lot of discussion, but it got enough where they did hear from a couple members of the community on the, and those commenters' position of some things to consider as it goes to the land use consideration of it. So essentially where we're at is we're going to be back at the drawing board, staff is, and we're going to meet with Rebecca's group because was the initiator of it. It was a code amendment that from my perspective, we felt like we were putting forth really what tenants to homeowners' desire was. Like any text amendment, there's a lot of inputs that go into it, including on this one, this board, planning commission, the public. And so one of the correspondents you'll see here, for example, sort of gently alleges that we're doing something different than that. And I don't think we are. I think we're trying to put forth tenants' desire, but it, like a lot of text amendments, sometimes the end of the day isn't what you start with. And so there's a lot to think about with this one, and we started that discussion with you guys last month, and there'll be more to talk about. So it's a work in progress, and you know, at some point we'll put all the communications that we have so far back on your agenda. I don't know that it'll be next month, but we certainly want to keep going on this with due diligence and the speed appropriate. So that's my update.
Questions, comments? Okay. Anything else under quick updates? That covers quick updates. Other new business? Any other new business before the board? I would like to see some discussion of the Horizon 2040 issues on our agenda for next month. I know that process is moving forward, and we've got maybe a month or two in which to, if we're gonna comment as a board on that, to do some, okay? All right, let's put that on the agenda thing for next month.
Would you also like the updated NOFA to come back next month based on the discussions today?
I think so. Let me defer to folks. You want to see it again before it goes out?
What's that?
Do we want to see the NOFA again before it goes out?
When does it need to go out?
Yeah, I thought we were gonna try to get it done by June, so.
Is that something we could do by email? Is that something you could send to us?
No, I don't think by
I don't think
email,
so.
but we could
This
either
is
take.
April.
Sorry,
So
everything
we
but-
could have a final bite at the apple in May? Would
Yeah,
that work?
and then at that point, that's when we could figure out the actual dates, and that still gets at, I think, the
Yeah.
goal, which was to get it out in the first 6 months, so we're still achieving that. But given the robust conversation, I think it would be prudent to bring it back and make sure that we're all on the same page with all of this. So there's enough there that would be my preference, is to bring it back and give you guys one more, an opportunity to look at it one more time.
And I know we've really gotten in the weeds on how this decision-making is going to take place. I think that's extraordinarily important, though, and I hope that stakeholders in the community will go back if they've got questions and look at our discussion the last 90 minutes to if you have questions about, well, how's AHAB going to be making the recommendations to the commission? We've got very ambitious goals. There are a lot of different projects that will fit under the umbrellas of these goals. You know, we don't have enough money to fund them all, but we sure hope to do those that are help those along. They're going to have the most impact, reach the most lives, make the greatest difference in people's lives.
Mr. Chairman, can I make
Yes,
one
sir.
quick point?
Yes, sir.
If there's any opportunity where, with the scoring, where we could see in real time how we're doing it, where it wouldn't have to go to you guys to calculate it, I think I would appreciate that, where if there's any way we could revise that.
Yeah, we could bring back the actual spreadsheet instead of the PDF, so you can see, all right, you give this a 1, if it's weighted at this weight, this is how it'll look, and that's how the final scores will look. Sounds like, I think everyone would appreciate that, and that gives the public an opportunity to go through the same exercise.
Okay.
Great.
And I would repeat the invitation that we received from Heather Hoy last month. If you have an opportunity to go to the Community Foundation's meeting coming up at the end of this month about the role of private philanthropy and affordable housing, I'm excited. That could be, I think, a meaningful conversation for our community.
It does mean you'll miss the county commission meeting, but that's okay.
Wasn't on my calendar. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Is that another football meeting, Patrick?